My name is Mildred, and I am 69 years old. As a retired jeweler and gemologist, I spent my career meticulously valuing and preserving unique pieces of jewelry, understanding that each stone and setting carries stories that transcend mere material worth. But of all the precious pieces that passed through my hands during 40 years in the business, none meant more to me than my cherished ancestral wedding ring. This exquisite piece, with its rare blue sapphire surrounded by perfectly matched diamonds, was rich with personal and family memories, a timeless symbol of my enduring love for my late husband, Arthur. Throughout the demanding years of building my career while raising my children, Daniel and Emily, I believed in the strength of our shared family history and our unbreakable bonds. I thought I understood the depths of human greed from my years in the jewelry business. I was wrong. The worst greed I would ever encounter came from my own son. It began with Daniel's announcement that he was engaged to Tiffany, a woman whose first question upon meeting me wasn't about our family or my health, but about the value of the jewelry I wore. My 45-year-old son, burdened by $150,000 in debts from failed business ventures and reckless spending, had found someone who shared his sense of entitlement to other people's treasures. "Mom," Daniel said during what I thought would be a celebration dinner, "Tiffany and I have been talking, and we think it's time for Dad's ring to have a new purpose. She should wear it for our wedding. It's the family legacy, and we're the future of this family now." When I gently explained that Arthur had specifically asked me to wear his mother's ring for the rest of my life, that it held generations of memories and represented a love story that couldn't be transferred. Like property, Daniel's response was swift and brutal. "You're being selfish, Mom? You have no humanity for my happiness. If you don't give me that ring, you'll never see me or my grandchildren again. You're losing your mind if you think you can control my life." Tiffany's contribution was even more vicious. "You're trying to ruin our wedding. You're clinging to the past and you're losing your mind. Give us the ring, you old fool. It's our legacy now. My dignity, my memories, my lifelong love for Arthur, all of it was being brutally stripped away by people who saw my most precious possession as nothing more than a means to impress others and solve their financial problems. Yet as despair threatened to consume me, something deeper stirred within my gemologist's soul. What Daniel, Tiffany, and even my daughter Emily didn't know was that I had been documenting everything in meticulous journals, recording each cruel demand and heartless threat. Most importantly, they didn't know about the perfect replica I had secretly commissioned years earlier, or about my retired master goldsmith ally, who had been watching their greed with growing disgust. This time, their insidious greed wouldn't just tear apart our family. It would expose their shocking lack of humanity, protect my sacred memories of Arthur, and prove that some treasures cannot be stolen by those who mistake entitlement for inheritance. 3 days after that devastating dinner, I sat in my living room, waiting for Daniel to arrive for what I hoped would be a calmer conversation about the ring and what it truly meant to our family. I had spent those days looking through photo albums, remembering Arthur's gentle hands as he placed the ring on my finger 50 years ago, hearing his voice as he made me promise to wear it always as a symbol of our unbreakable bond. When Daniel arrived, he wasn't alone. Tiffany swept into my modest home with the confidence of someone who had already decided the outcome of our discussion. She was a striking woman in her early 30s, impeccably dressed and carrying herself with the kind of aggressive entitlement that made my skin crawl. "Mildred," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to settle this ring situation today. Daniel and I have already designed our wedding around having that sapphire as the centerpiece, and we're not changing our plans because you're having sentimental attachments to old jewelry. Daniel sat beside her, avoiding my eyes, his face set in the stubborn expression I remembered from his difficult teenage years. But this wasn't adolescent rebellion. This was calculated cruelty from a grown man who owed me more than he could ever repay. Daniel, I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm, this isn't just jewelry. This ring represents your father's last wish, for me a symbol of our enduring love. It holds generations of memories, stories of your grandparents and great-grandparents. You know what it means to me, to all of us. Daniel's response was cold and devoid of any recognition of our shared history. Mom, it's just a ring. Tiffany deserves it more than you do. She's building a future, not living in the past. If you don't give it to me, you'll never see me or my children again. You're losing your mind if you think you can control my life. You're selfish and you have no humanity for my happiness. The words hit me like physical blows. This was my son, the baby I had rocked through countless sleepless nights, the boy I had cheered at baseball games, the young man I had supported through college and his early career struggles. Now he was treating me like an obstacle to be removed, a problem to be solved through threats and emotional blackmail. My debts total $150,000. He continued, his voice rising with desperation, masked as anger. I need to impress Tiffany's family, need to show them I can provide for her. That ring is worth at least $20,000. We need it more than you do. Tiffany leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're trying to ruin our wedding. You're clinging to the past and you're losing your mind. Give us the ring, you old fool. It's our legacy now. You've had your turn to wear it. Now it's time for someone who can actually appreciate its value. Her words revealed everything I needed to know about her character. She didn't see the ring as a symbol of love or family heritage. She saw it as an expensive accessory that would enhance her social status and help solve their financial problems. Tiffany, I said, struggling to maintain my composure. This ring has been in Arthur's family for 4 generations. It's not about monetary value. It's about preserving the love and commitment it represents. Arthur made me promise to wear it always, to keep the family tradition alive. Traditions change, she snapped. Old people need to accept that the world doesn't revolve around their sentimental attachments. You're being selfish and manipulative, using guilt to control Daniel's choices. When it became clear that reason and emotional appeals wouldn't sway them, I made the mistake of reaching out to Emily, my daughter, hoping she would help them understand the ring's significance and support my position. Emily's response was heartbreaking in its weakness. When I called her after Daniel and Tiffany left, her voice was strained with conflict and fear. Mom, he's serious about cutting you off, she said, tears evident in her voice. I don't know what to do. Maybe it's just a ring. Maybe it's not worth losing Daniel and the grandchildren forever. Don't fight him on this. You'll lose him forever, and then what will any of us have? Her capitulation felt like another betrayal, though I understood the impossible position Daniel had put her in. He had weaponized the family relationships, forcing everyone to choose between supporting me or maintaining access to him and his children. The psychological warfare escalated quickly. Within days of our confrontation, Daniel sent me a photo that was clearly designed to maximize my pain. It showed him, Tiffany, and my 3 grandchildren at a family outing to the zoo, all of them smiling and laughing. The caption read, "Family fun, missing toxic people." The message was unmistakable. I was the toxic person, the problem that needed to be removed from their happy family picture. My grandchildren, who had spent countless afternoons in my kitchen, learning to bake cookies, and listening to stories about their grandfather were being taught to see me as the villain in their family story. Tiffany's campaign against me intensified on social media, where she began posting manipulated narratives about our family conflict. She painted herself as the victim of an unreasonable old woman who was trying to control her son's life and sabotage his happiness. "Some people just can't let go of the past," she wrote in one post that was shared dozens of times. When elderly family members become obsessed with objects instead of relationships, everyone suffers. Praying for wisdom and healing for those who choose possessions over people. The implication was clear to anyone who knew our situation. I was the elderly family member obsessed with objects, the selfish woman who valued jewelry more than her son's happiness. But the legal threats were the most frightening escalation of all. Mr. Davies Daniel's lawyer sent me a formal letter claiming that my refusal to give Daniel the ring constituted emotional distress and obstruction of family legacy. The letter threatened a lawsuit that would seek damages for the psychological harm I was supposedly causing by withholding Daniel's rightful inheritance. The legal language was designed to intimidate and confuse me, to make me believe that I was somehow violating Daniel's rights by keeping a ring that Arthur had given to me as his wife. The letter suggested that my attachment to the ring was evidence of mental instability, that my refusal to surrender it proved I was becoming incompetent and possibly dangerous. "Mrs. Johnson," the letter read, "your continued refusal to honor your son's reasonable request is causing severe emotional distress to Mr. Daniel Johnson and his fiancée. Unless this matter is resolved within 10 days, my client will be forced to pursue all available legal remedies, including but not limited to a civil lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress." As I sat in my empty house that night, holding the letter that threatened to criminalize my love for Arthur and my commitment to his final wishes, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my 69 years. My son had become a stranger, motivated by greed. My daughter was too frightened to support me, and my grandchildren were being turned against me by people who saw my affection as a weakness to be exploited. But as I looked down at the ring on my finger, feeling the weight of 4 generations of love and commitment, I felt something unexpected clarity. They could threaten me, intimidate me, and try to destroy my reputation, but they couldn't force me to betray Arthur's trust or surrender the symbol of our enduring love. The campaign against my reputation took on a life of its own as Tiffany transformed her personal vendetta into a public crusade. She created a dedicated social media page called Elder Abuse Awareness, ostensibly to educate people about how elderly family members can become unreasonably possessive of material objects and use guilt to manipulate their adult children. The page was filled with carefully staged content designed to make me look like a wealthy, selfish woman hoarding valuable assets, while my son struggled with financial difficulties. Tiffany posted photos of my modest home taken from angles that made it appear larger and more luxurious than it actually was, contrasting them with pictures of herself and Daniel looking burdened by stress and financial pressure. When elderly parents refuse to share family heirlooms with the next generation, she wrote in one particularly damaging post, "They're not preserving tradition. They're using possessions to maintain control over their adult children's lives. Love means letting go, not clinging to objects that could help your family build their future." The post was shared hundreds of times with comments praising Tiffany for speaking out about such a difficult family situation. People who didn't know me or our family history saw the carefully curated images and concluded that I was indeed a selfish old woman who valued jewelry more than my son's well-being. But Tiffany's most insidious move was her demand that I transfer what she called the family assets to Daniel immediately. She claimed that Arthur's inheritance, which had helped support me since his death, should rightfully belong to his son rather than his widow. Mildred has been living off Arthur's money for years. She posted on her abuse awareness page while Daniel struggles to support his own family. When elderly spouses hoard their deceased partner's assets instead of sharing them with the children, it's a form of financial abuse that destroys families. The accusation was both false and devastating. Arthur's inheritance had been modest, mostly consisting of his life insurance policy and his portion of our jointly owned home. I had been living primarily on my own retirement savings from my jewelry business money I had earned through decades of hard work and careful financial planning. But Tiffany's narrative was more compelling than the truth. The image of a greedy widow hoarding her dead husband's money while her son suffered financially was easier to understand and more emotionally satisfying than the complex reality of our situation. The revelation of Daniel's true character came during a phone call I wasn't supposed to overhear. I had gone to his house, hoping to speak with him privately, to find some way to reach the son I remembered beneath the stranger he had become. When no one answered the door, I could hear voices coming from the backyard, and I followed the sound, hoping to find them enjoying a peaceful moment when we might be able to talk. Instead, I heard Daniel speaking to Tiffany with a callousness that took my breath away. The old lady thinks she can stop me with her sentimental garbage. He was saying, his voice filled with cruel amusement. This will finally prove I'm the real heir to Dad's legacy. Who cares about some dusty old ring? It's just a means to an end to get ahead and impress your family. Tiffany's laughter in response was like ice in my veins. Your mother's always been too emotional about everything. She needs to face reality. You're the man of the family now, and that ring belongs with us. We'll get much better use out of it than she ever will. Standing in Daniel's backyard, listening to my son discuss my emotional attachment to Arthur's memory as if it were a character flaw to be overcome, I finally understood what I was truly facing. This wasn't just about a ring or even about money. This was about power, about Daniel's need to prove his dominance over me and his right to determine how our family's legacy would be distributed. That night alone in my house with the ring safely on my finger, I made the decision to reveal a truth I had kept hidden for over 20 years. A secret so painful and shameful that I had never told Arthur, never told my children, never told anyone. When Daniel was 25 years old, just starting his career in sales, he had developed a gambling addiction that nearly destroyed his life. It started with office pools and weekend trips to the casino, harmless fun that gradually escalated into something much more dangerous. Within 2 years, Daniel had accumulated over $100,000 in debt to people who weren't patient about repayment. These weren't bank loans or credit card debts. These were obligations to loan sharks and illegal gambling operations, people who had made it clear that failure to pay would result in serious physical harm. When Daniel finally came to me, terrified and desperate, he was facing threats against his life. The people he owed money to had made it clear that they knew where he lived, where he worked, and that they wouldn't hesitate to hurt him or his family if he didn't pay immediately. I had used every resource at my disposal to save him. I liquidated my own inheritance from my parents, over $50,000 that was supposed to secure my retirement. I worked grueling extra hours at the jewelry store, taking on every overtime shift and special project available. I even sold some of my own personal jewelry pieces that had sentimental value but could be converted to cash quickly. Most painfully, I had negotiated directly with Daniel's creditors, using my reputation in the business community and my connections in law enforcement to convince them to accept a payment plan rather than resorting to violence. I had compromised my own safety and integrity to protect my son from the consequences of his choices. The entire process had taken 3 years and cost me not just financially, but emotionally and physically. The stress of hiding Daniel's crisis from Arthur, of working extra hours while maintaining the facade of a normal family life, of living with the constant fear that Daniel's creditors might change their minds about our agreement, had taken years off my life. And I had never told Daniel the full extent of what I had done for him. He knew I had helped financially, but he didn't know about the negotiations with dangerous people, the personal risks I had taken, the sacrifice of my own financial security for his safety. I had let him believe that he had worked his way out of his problems largely on his own, that his recovery was proof of his strength and character rather than evidence of his mother's sacrifice. Now, 20 years later, he was demanding that I surrender Arthur's ring as if I owed him something, as if my love and devotion had been insufficient, as if my lifetime of sacrifice entitled him to take whatever he wanted from me. When I tried to subtly reference my past sacrifices during one of our increasingly hostile phone conversations, hoping to remind him of the depth of my love and the extent of my commitment to his well-being, his response was brutal. "Mom, you're always trying to make me feel guilty with your so-called sacrifices," he snapped. "Your past choices are your own business. Tiffany says you're trying to manipulate us with guilt and sentimentality, and she's right. You made those decisions for your own reasons, not for me." Emily's response to my distress was equally devastating, though driven by fear rather than cruelty. When I called her sobbing after Daniel's rejection of my subtle plea, she sounded exhausted and defeated. "Mom, honestly, maybe you are confused about all this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's hard to accept change, to let go of the past. Maybe you should just give him the ring. It's not worth this pain, not worth losing him forever." But the cruelest manipulation came through Mr. Davies, who presented me with what he called a family solution that was designed to destroy my credibility while giving Daniel everything he wanted. According to his proposal, if I would publicly donate the ring to Daniel and agree to a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation to determine my mental competence, then Daniel and Tiffany would graciously agree not to file criminal charges against me for emotional distress and obstruction of inheritance. This is a generous offer that allows your family to heal while ensuring that Daniel receives what is rightfully his, Mr. Davies explained with practiced sincerity. The alternative is a very public legal battle where your mental state will be scrutinized by the courts and the community. The message was clear: surrender the ring and accept the narrative that I was mentally incompetent, or face a legal battle that would destroy what remained of my reputation and financial security. But as I sat in that lawyer's office, listening to him outline the terms of my surrender, I felt something unexpected relief, because finally the mask had come off. Finally, the people who had been pretending that this was about family harmony and Daniel's happiness had revealed their true motivations. They weren't interested in preserving family relationships or honoring Arthur's memory. They were interested in my humiliation, my submission, my complete acceptance of their right to take whatever they wanted from me. And that clarity gave me something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began: the determination to fight back with everything I had. The final legal assault came with the cold efficiency of a military operation designed to strip away every connection I had to my son and grandchildren. 6 months after Daniel's initial demand for the ring, after my refusal to accept their settlement offer, he and Tiffany executed a plan that would permanently banish me from their lives. The restraining order papers arrived on a Monday morning, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who looked uncomfortable as he handed me the thick envelope. Inside were legal documents that redefined my existence in the most devastating terms possible. According to the court papers, I was now legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Daniel, Tiffany, or my grandchildren. The order was based on fabricated allegations of harassment and emotional distress related to my refusal to surrender the ring accusations that painted me as a dangerous stalker rather than a heartbroken mother. The petition described me as an elderly individual with deteriorating mental capacity who has become obsessed with controlling her adult son's life through emotional manipulation and threats. It claimed that my refusal to give Daniel the ring was evidence of psychological instability and inability to accept appropriate family boundaries. Most devastatingly, it alleged that my continued contact with the family was causing severe emotional distress to my grandchildren, who were supposedly afraid of their grandmother's erratic behavior and inappropriate demands. The restraining order meant that I couldn't attend family gatherings, couldn't visit my grandchildren, couldn't even accidentally encounter them at public events without facing arrest and prosecution. In the eyes of the law, I had become a threat to the very people I loved most in the world. Despite the legal risks, despite the humiliation and fear, I couldn't let it end like this. I spent days putting together one final appeal to whatever humanity might remain in my son. I created a photo album filled with memories of Daniel's childhood pictures of him with Arthur family celebrations where we had all been happy and united. I wrote a letter that poured out my heart, recounting the bedtime stories I had read to him, the little league games Arthur and I had attended, the pride we had felt watching him graduate from college. I reminded him of family traditions, of inside jokes, of the thousands of small moments that make up a lifetime of love. I left the package on Daniel's doorstep, anonymously, my hands shaking as I placed it there. It was my final plea, my last attempt to reach the little boy I had raised, to remind him of who we had been to each other before greed poisoned everything. 3 days later, Tiffany posted a photo on social media that destroyed what remained of my hope. She had photographed my album torn and scattered across their dining room table like garbage. The caption she wrote beneath the image was designed for maximum cruelty, cleaning out the clutter. Some people just can't let go of the past, moving forward from negativity and desperate attempts to manipulate. The photos I had treasured, the memories I had preserved, the evidence of Daniel's capacity for love and joy, all of it had been destroyed with the same casual malice they had shown me throughout this ordeal. Daniel's response came as a text message, cold and final. "Consider this closed, Mom. You lose. Don't contact us again. Ever. You're causing too much trouble with your craziness." The word craziness hit me like a physical blow. My love for Arthur, my commitment to honoring his wishes, my refusal to surrender the symbol of our enduring bond, all of it had been reduced to mental illness in his mind. Tiffany continued her campaign of character assassination, calling mutual acquaintances to share her concerns about my mental health. She painted herself as the long-suffering daughter-in-law, dealing with an increasingly unstable elderly relative, someone who was bravely protecting her family from my inappropriate demands and manipulative behavior. But the cruelest blow came from my 12-year-old grandson, Ethan. When I encountered him at the grocery store, this boy I had babysat and loved looked at me with the same cold indifference I had seen in his father's eyes. "Grandma, you're acting crazy," he said loud enough for other shoppers to hear. "Why don't you just die already? Dad says you're ruining our family with your stupid obsession with that ring." Those words from the mouth of my own grandchild felt like the final nail in my coffin. I had become the villain in their story, the crazy grandmother whose removal made their lives better and more peaceful. Within weeks, the psychological and financial pressure led to a guardianship petition filed by Daniel and Tiffany, claiming that I was no longer competent to manage my own affairs. Despite my protests, despite the obvious financial motivation behind their actions, the court appointed a guardian who immediately moved me into an assisted living facility. My personal belongings were inventoried and largely disposed of. My access to financial accounts was restricted. My phone was confiscated to prevent me from harassing my family. I was stripped of my independence, my dignity, and my voice, all under the legal fiction that this was for my own protection. In that sterile facility, surrounded by other elderly people who had been similarly discarded by their families, I finally broke down and revealed the deepest, most guarded secret of my life. The truth about Arthur, the secret I had carried alone for over 30 years. My beloved husband hadn't been the faithful family man that Daniel and Emily remembered. Throughout our marriage, Arthur had struggled with a sexual addiction that led to multiple affairs and a secret life that threatened to destroy his professional reputation and our family's standing in the community. I had discovered his infidelity early in our marriage, finding evidence of his encounters with other women, his visits to places and people that shattered my understanding of the man I had married. The betrayal was devastating, but the choice I faced was even more painful. Arthur was building a career in local politics, serving on the city council and considering a run for mayor. The exposure of his secret life would have destroyed not just his political ambitions, but his business reputation and our children's futures. In our small community, the shame would have followed Daniel and Emily for the rest of their lives. So I had made the decision to protect him, to become complicit in maintaining the facade of our perfect marriage. I helped him cover his absences, manage the emotional fallout of his behavior, and used my connections in the jewelry business to subtly influence media coverage when rumors occasionally surfaced. For 30 years, I had sacrificed my own emotional truth and marital happiness to preserve Arthur's public image and protect our children's innocence. I had endured the humiliation of knowing that other women had what I had lost, that my marriage was a performance rather than a partnership. The ancestral ring that Arthur had given me wasn't just a symbol of love. It was his acknowledgement of my sacrifice, his recognition of what I had given up to protect him and our family. His final wish that I wear it always wasn't just about sentiment. It was about honoring the woman who had saved his legacy at the cost of her own happiness. Now Daniel was demanding that ring as if it were his inheritance, as if my decades of sacrifice had earned me nothing, as if the symbol of my endured humiliation was just another piece of valuable jewelry to be distributed among his creditors. The cosmic irony was almost unbearable. I had spent my entire adult life protecting the men I loved from the consequences of their choices, and now my son was using Arthur's imaginary perfection as a weapon against me. But sitting in that facility, stripped of everything I had worked for, everything I had protected, everything I had sacrificed to maintain, I finally understood something that had taken me too long to learn. Love doesn't require you to sacrifice your dignity. Protection doesn't mean enabling someone's selfishness. And family loyalty can't be built on lies and manipulation, no matter how well-intentioned those lies might be. The reckoning I had promised was no longer just about the ring or Daniel's greed. It was about truth itself, about the difference between love and enabling, about the courage to protect what truly matters, even when it destroys everything you thought you understood about your own life. They thought they had silenced me, erased me, reduced me to a confused old woman whose own family had rejected her. They were about to discover that a retired gemologist never stops distinguishing between what's real and what's fake, and I had been documenting their deception from the very beginning. The truth was coming, and it would be more devastating than any of them could imagine. Life inside Memory Lane Gardens was a carefully orchestrated nightmare designed to strip away every vestige of my professional identity and personal dignity. The facility itself was pleasant enough on the surface, with its pastel walls and artificial flower arrangements, but beneath the veneer of compassionate care lay something far more sinister. The staff had clearly been influenced by Daniel and Tiffany's generous donations and their fabricated reports about my mental state. Dr. Patterson, the facility director, treated me with the condescending kindness reserved for people who could no longer be trusted with their own thoughts. "Now, Mildred," she would say whenever I tried to discuss the ring or my professional background, "we've talked about this. You're safe here. You don't need to worry about complicated jewelry matters anymore. Those days are behind you now." My sharp intellect, honed by decades of gemological work, was constantly questioned and dismissed. When I tried to explain the historical significance of family heirlooms, when I attempted to discuss proper jewelry care, the staff would exchange knowing looks and make notes on their clipboards. "You're a resident now, dear, not a diamond expert," one nurse told me with maddening sweetness. "Let's focus on today, shall we? Would you like to try the art therapy? We have some lovely coloring books with simple patterns." My attempts to sketch jewelry designs to maintain any connection with my life's work were met with gentle but firm refusal. My personal papers had been secured by my guardian for my own protection. My professional journals were dismissed as obsessive documentation that might agitate me if I continued to review them. I was being systematically erased, my expertise reframed as dangerous obsession, my decades of professional achievement dismissed as the confused ramblings of an elderly woman who couldn't distinguish between past and present. The most heartbreaking torture came in the form of carefully orchestrated visits from my grandchildren. Daniel and Tiffany would bring Ethan and Chloe for brief, highly supervised meetings that were designed to reinforce the narrative of my decline while allowing them to maintain the appearance of family concern. "Grandma, do you remember who I am?" 15-year-old Ethan would ask with rehearsed concern, following a script his parents had clearly provided. The question was designed to make me appear confused and disoriented regardless of how I answered. 13-year-old Chloe would bring comfort items that further reinforced their narrative. "We brought you some coloring books, Grandma," she would say, with forced cheer, as if I were a child who needed simple activities to occupy my declining mind. But the cruelest moment came when Ethan showed me a photograph on his phone. It was a picture of Tiffany at a charity gala wearing what appeared to be Arthur's ancestral ring, her hand positioned prominently as she posed for the cameras. "Mommy says you don't need this anymore," Ethan said, with the casual thoughtlessness of youth. "She says it looks better on someone young who can actually appreciate its beauty." I stared at that photo until my vision blurred with tears. The ring I had protected, the symbol of 4 generations of love and commitment, was being flaunted by someone who saw it as nothing more than an expensive accessory to enhance her social status. The public humiliation continued relentlessly through Tiffany's social media campaign. She posted regularly about the impending sale of my beloved home, celebrating it as a wise financial decision and a fresh start for her family. Excited to modernize this beautiful property, she wrote beneath photos of proposed renovations that would strip away every historical detail, every personal touch that had made it our family sanctuary. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for the greater good of the family. My home, where Arthur and I had built our life together, where I had raised my children and created countless precious memories, was being publicly demolished before my eyes. The gardens I had tended, the rooms I had decorated with care, the spaces that held the essence of our family's history, all of it was being erased and replaced with generic modern fixtures that had no connection to our story. The financial isolation was equally systematic. I discovered that Daniel, as my court-appointed guardian, now controlled every aspect of my economic life. My pension payments were automatically diverted to an account I couldn't access. My personal savings had been secured for my care, meaning Daniel decided how every penny was spent. When I tried to contact my own attorney, I was told that my guardian had retained new legal representation that was better suited to handle elder care issues. My attempts to reach former colleagues or professional organizations were blocked by facility staff who claimed such contacts might agitate me. I overheard nurses describing me as a high-maintenance resident whose family rarely visits despite living nearby. The implication was clear. I was a burden, an abandoned old woman whose complaints were symptoms of her condition rather than legitimate grievances. The psychological pressure was designed to make me question my own memories and judgment. Every day brought new examples of my supposed incompetence, my alleged confusion, my imagined paranoia. The staff's gentle condescension was almost worse than outright cruelty because it came wrapped in the language of care and concern. But in my darkest moment, when I was beginning to wonder if they were right about my mental state, an unexpected lifeline appeared. Maria, a young aide who cleaned my room each morning, had noticed my distress and taken pity on me. "Mrs. Johnson," she whispered one morning as she pretended to organize my bedside table, "I found this in the storage room. I thought you might like it." She pressed a small, worn jewelry design book into my hands, an old reference guide that had somehow found its way to the facility. As I opened it that evening, my trembling fingers discovered a tiny inscription on the inside cover, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it: Eleanor's help. Eleanor, my dear friend and colleague from the Gemological Institute, a woman who had worked alongside me for decades and knew my professional standards better than anyone. If she had somehow left this message, if she was aware of my situation, then perhaps my hidden documentation was still accessible. Perhaps the evidence I had gathered was still waiting to be revealed. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't completely alone. Somewhere outside these sterile walls, people who knew the truth were watching, waiting, preparing to act. The truth would emerge. It had to, because the alternative, the possibility that Daniel and Tiffany would succeed in erasing me completely, was too terrible to accept. 8 months into my imprisonment at Memory Lane Gardens, Daniel and Tiffany launched their most audacious attack yet. They announced a family legacy and modern inheritance event that would showcase their expertise in updating traditional family values and maximizing heritage assets for future generations. The promotional materials were professionally designed and widely distributed. Daniel's photograph appeared on conference brochures described as a visionary heir who had revolutionized his approach to family wealth management. Tiffany was featured as a heritage consultant with expertise in modernizing traditional family structures. I learned about the event when a board staff member at the facility turned on the news during dinner. There on the screen was my eldest son standing behind a podium speaking to an audience of hundreds about the importance of moving beyond emotional attachments to objects. Traditional families often become trapped by sentimental attachments to heirlooms that have outlived their practical value, Daniel said with practiced authority. When elderly family members hoard valuable assets instead of sharing them with the next generation, everyone suffers. Sometimes love means making difficult decisions about family property. The camera panned across displays that featured what appeared to be Arthur's ring, prominently showcased as an example of how proper asset management could transform stagnant family wealth into productive investments. My most precious possession was being used as a prop in their performance of financial wisdom. But it was the replica I realized with a mixture of relief and horror. The perfect reproduction I had commissioned years earlier was being displayed as if it were the genuine article, while they claimed credit for the difficult decision to repurpose family assets for the greater good. Daniel's presentation was a masterpiece of manipulation disguised as financial advice. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had inherited wisdom rather than stolen it, describing his transformation of the family's approach to wealth management. My mother's generation believed in preserving objects, he said, his voice filled with patient condescension. But we understand that true legacy lies in securing the family's financial future, not in clinging to sentimental attachments that prevent growth and progress. Tiffany's portion of the presentation was even more devastating. She spoke with clinical detachment about the dangers of allowing untrained family members to control valuable assets without professional oversight. When elderly relatives become fixated on hoarding heirlooms, she said, it can create serious problems for younger generations trying to build their futures. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is gently remove these responsibilities and place them in more capable hands. The audience nodded thoughtfully as she described someone whose emotional attachment to family treasures had become dangerous obsession, whose lifetime of caring for precious objects had become pathological accumulation. She was describing me, but in language so carefully crafted that it sounded like compassionate concern rather than character assassination. But the cruelest blow came when they showed video testimonials from my own grandchildren. Ethan appeared on screen, now 16, speaking with the confidence of youth about his newfound appreciation for financial freedom. My grandmother used to worry constantly about old jewelry and family heirlooms, he said with a patronizing smile. But my parents have taught me that true wealth comes from smart investments, not from clinging to the past. We've learned to focus on what really matters, building our future, instead of dwelling on old stories. The words hit me like physical blows. This boy I had taught to appreciate craftsmanship, who had once listened with fascination as I explained the history behind our family's treasures, was now dismissing my life's work as meaningless sentimentality. Chloe's contribution was shorter, but equally devastating. The camera showed her laughing as she pointed to one of my old jewelry appraisal tools, now displayed as an example of outdated methodology. Grandma used this to look at diamonds. She giggled. It's so old-fashioned. We use digital scanners now, Everything's so much faster and more accurate than Grandma's old ways. The implication was clear. My careful, methodical approach to gemological work, my respect for traditional techniques, my attention to detail and historical context were not just outdated, but ridiculous. The younger generation had moved beyond such antiquated approaches thanks to their parents' guidance. I sat in that sterile facility common room, surrounded by other forgotten elderly people, watching my professional legacy being systematically dismantled on national television. Every principle I had held dear, every method I had perfected over decades of practice, was being reframed as evidence of my inability to adapt to modern realities. The event was covered by multiple media outlets, all of them presenting the same narrative, a progressive approach to family wealth that had rescued important assets from the confused control of an aging relative. Daniel and Tiffany were being celebrated as experts in family financial management, their credibility built on the ruins of my destroyed reputation. But not everyone was convinced by their performance. Dr. Harrison Webb, a retired gemologist who had worked with me for over 30 years, watched the event coverage with growing disgust. He remembered me as a meticulous professional whose standards were beyond reproach, whose work had been cited in industry publications and respected by colleagues across the country. Dr. Webb recognized the sophisticated nature of what was being done to me. He had seen similar cases where families used ageism and professional discrediting to steal from elderly relatives, but rarely with such polished public relations and media manipulation. He reached out to Eleanor, my old colleague from the Gemological Institute, expressing his concerns about what appeared to be a coordinated campaign against my professional reputation. Together, they began quietly investigating the claims being made about my mental competence and the circumstances surrounding the ring's transfer. "Something is very wrong here," Dr. Webb told Eleanor during one of their conversations. Mildred Johnson was one of the most competent gemologists I ever worked with. The woman they're describing on television bears no resemblance to the professional I knew. Eleanor shared his concerns. She had been trying to reach me for months, but her calls were always intercepted by facility staff who claimed I was too unwell for outside contact. Her letters were returned unopened, marked as inappropriate correspondence that might agitate the resident. But Eleanor was nothing if not persistent. She began documenting the inconsistencies in Daniel and Tiffany's public statements, comparing them with the records she had of my actual work and professional relationships. She was building a case quietly and carefully that would eventually expose the lies being told about my competence and character. As I sat in that facility, watching my life's work being perverted and my grandchildren being used as weapons against my memory, I felt something cold and determined growing within me. They thought they had destroyed me completely, reduced me to a confused old woman whose protests could be safely ignored. But they had forgotten something crucial. A true gemologist never stops distinguishing between what's genuine and what's fake. And I had been documenting their deception from the moment it began. The truth was coming, and when it emerged, it would shatter their carefully constructed lies as thoroughly as they had tried to shatter me. The final financial assault began exactly 1 year after Daniel's initial demand for the ring delivered with a precision that could only have been planned for months. Daniel, leveraging his position as my court-appointed guardian, and Tiffany's network of professional contacts, launched a coordinated attack designed to strip away the last vestiges of my independence and dignity. The lawsuit papers arrived at the facility on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the cold efficiency of a legal execution. Daniel was suing me for $1.5 million, claiming that my harassment and defamatory statements about their ring acquisition had caused him severe emotional distress and damaged his newly established reputation as a heritage consultant. The legal document was thick with accusations that twisted every attempt I had made to protect Arthur's legacy into evidence of my supposed malice and instability. My efforts to educate people about the ring's historical significance were described as obsessive campaigns. My questions about proper documentation were framed as harassment and intimidation. But the lawsuit was just the beginning. Simultaneously, Daniel contacted my former jewelry associations and professional organizations, spreading the same fabricated narrative about my mental decline that he had used to gain guardianship. He claimed that my recent behavior raised serious questions about my past professional competence, suggesting that my supposed cognitive issues might have affected my work for years. The response was swift and devastating. The Gemological Institute, where I had been a member for over 40 years, launched an investigation into my past performance. Without allowing me to defend myself or even informing me of the proceedings, they revoked my professional certifications and removed my name from their list of distinguished fellows. My retirement pension, which represented the security Arthur and I had worked decades to ensure, was suspended pending a review of my professional conduct. The pension administrators faced with Daniel's official reports as my guardian questioned whether I was competent to receive such payments. Most painfully, they stripped away the professional honors I had earned through a lifetime of dedicated service. My name was removed from the Institute's Hall of Excellence. The scholarship fund that had been established in my honor was quietly dissolved. 40 years of professional achievement vanished as if they had never existed. The financial pressure mounted with each passing day. Legal bills consumed what little remained in the accounts I could still theoretically access. The facility's fees, supposedly covered by my guardian, began accumulating as additional charges that Daniel claimed were my responsibility. Then came the final humiliation, the sale of my beloved home. Despite my protests, despite the obvious sentimental value of the property, Daniel arranged for its immediate liquidation to cover what he claimed were my mounting debts and care costs. Tiffany made sure the sale was as public and humiliating as possible. She tipped off local media about the troubled elderly woman whose family was forced to sell her home due to her mismanagement of finances and inability to accept reality. The news crew captured footage of strangers walking through my house, evaluating my life's possessions like merchandise at a garage sale. The reporter described me as a former jewelry professional who had fallen on hard times due to family disputes and apparent mental health issues. The family hopes this sale will provide the resources needed for Mrs. Johnson's ongoing care. The reporter explained while Tiffany stood in my driveway, giving interviews about the difficult decisions families must make when elderly relatives become unable to manage their affairs responsibly. My home sold for $750,000 money that represented not just my financial security, but the liquidation of a lifetime of memories, the destruction of the sanctuary where Arthur and I had built our life together. But Tiffany's celebration of my destruction was perhaps the most vicious of all. Using money that had originally come from the sale of my home and the seizure of my assets, she and Daniel purchased a custom jewelry store that they announced would serve as their base of operations for their new heritage consulting business. The store was designed to showcase their collection of properly managed family assets, including prominent displays of what appeared to be Arthur's ring and other pieces they claimed to have rescued from inappropriate hoarding by elderly relatives. The grand opening was covered by local media, with Daniel giving interviews about the importance of professional asset management and protecting family wealth from well-meaning but misguided amateur efforts. We wanted to create something that would honor family legacies while ensuring they serve a productive purpose, he said with practiced sincerity. Too often, valuable heirlooms are locked away by people who don't understand their true potential. The store cost over $200,000 to establish money that represented the theft of my life's work and the systematic destruction of everything I had built. But Daniel and Tiffany presented it as evidence of their business acumen and their commitment to proper heritage preservation. The physical and emotional toll of this relentless assault finally overwhelmed my body's ability to endure. The stress, the constant anxiety about my uncertain future, the grief over losing everything I had worked for, all combined to trigger a massive heart attack that left me unconscious on the floor of the facility's common room. The paramedics who responded treated me like just another elderly indigent, someone whose life had little value and whose survival was questionable. As they worked to stabilize my heart in the emergency room, I drifted in and out of consciousness, barely aware of the medical activity around me. But in those moments between awareness and oblivion, a buried memory surfaced with startling clarity. I was back in my bedroom 30 years earlier, listening to Arthur make a desperate phone call to someone whose voice I couldn't identify. "I need the money," Arthur was saying, his voice strained with desperation I had rarely heard from him. "The treatment costs are more than I anticipated, and I can't let anyone know about this. My reputation would be ruined if this got out." I had forgotten about that conversation, had pushed it into the back of my mind, along with so many other uncomfortable truths about Arthur's secret life. But now, lying in that hospital bed, I realized what I had been hearing. Arthur hadn't just been hiding affairs. He had been hiding a serious medical condition, possibly addiction treatment or therapy for his compulsive behavior, something that required expensive private care to avoid professional embarrassment. The money he had needed, the secret. He had been so desperate to protect it all, connected to the pattern I was seeing in Daniel's current behavior. The gambling addiction, I had covered up the financial desperation, the willingness to destroy family relationships for money. All of it echoed Arthur's hidden struggles. I had spent my life protecting the men I loved from the consequences of their choices, and now Daniel was following the same destructive path his father had walked, using my love and sacrifice as weapons against me. But this memory also gave me something I hadn't felt in months, a sense of purpose. If Daniel's pattern of self-destructive behavior mirrored his father's, then perhaps the documentation I had kept, the evidence I had preserved, could expose not just their current fraud, but the generational cycle of deception that had consumed our family. The truth was more complex and more painful than I had ever imagined, but it was still the truth. And somewhere in places they didn't know about, that truth was waiting to be revealed. Recovery from the heart attack was slow and painful, but it gave me the clarity I needed to make one final attempt at reaching Daniel with the truth about our family's destructive patterns. The hospital room became my sanctuary, a place where I could think and plan without the constant surveillance and manipulation I had endured at the facility. I decided to create a video message that would cut through all the lies and legal maneuvering, a direct appeal to Daniel's conscience that would force him to confront the reality of what he was doing to our family and to himself. With the help of Nurse Jennifer, a compassionate woman who reminded me of Emily at that age, I recorded a 20-minute testimonial that laid out the facts with the same precision I had once used to evaluate precious stones. In the video, I played the unedited audio recordings I had made of Daniel's early demands for the ring, capturing his own words as he threatened to cut me off from my grandchildren unless I surrendered Arthur's most precious gift to me. "Listen to his voice, Daniel," I said into the camera, my own voice steady despite my physical weakness. "Listen to how you talk about your father's legacy, about your mother's love, as if they were obstacles to be overcome rather than treasures to be cherished. This isn't grief or financial planning. This is the same destructive pattern that consumed your father. But the most damaging evidence was what I revealed about Daniel's hidden gambling addiction and reckless spending, supported by financial records that Tiffany thought had been destroyed. Using my professional training and documentation, I explained how his current debts and desperate behavior mirrored the crisis I had helped him through 20 years earlier. Your father struggled with secret addictions that nearly destroyed our family, I said, looking directly into the camera. I sacrificed everything to protect his reputation and cover up his problems. Now you're following the same path, using the same manipulation tactics, destroying the same family relationships to feed your own destructive impulses. I also made a carefully worded reference to Arthur's hidden medical expenses and secret treatment, not enough to expose the full scope of his deception, but sufficient to suggest that Daniel's current behavior was part of a larger pattern of family dysfunction. Jennifer helped me send the video through a secure channel that would ensure it reached Daniel, directly bypassing Tiffany's surveillance of my communications. We timed the transmission for a moment when Tiffany would be out of town on one of her speaking engagements about modern inheritance management, giving Daniel the opportunity to see the evidence privately before deciding how to respond. But we had underestimated the extent of Tiffany's monitoring network. Through contacts at the hospital, through staff members she had bribed to watch for any concerning behavior. From me, she learned about the video before Daniel ever received it. What Tiffany did next demonstrated a level of sophisticated manipulation that took my breath away. She didn't just intercept and delete the video. She had it professionally edited by someone with expertise in media manipulation, turning my desperate attempt to share the truth into apparent evidence of my complete mental breakdown. The edited version removed all the factual evidence and supporting documentation, leaving only the emotional moments where I expressed my pain and confusion about Daniel's betrayal. My voice was subtly altered to sound more desperate and unstable. Background noise was added to create an atmosphere of chaos and mental disturbance. Most devastatingly, Tiffany used sophisticated editing techniques to splice together segments from different parts of the recording, creating statements I had never made. Through careful manipulation, she made it appear that I was threatening Daniel's family, demanding money, and making wild accusations based on paranoid delusions about Arthur's character. Tiffany then sold this manipulated video to a national news organization as evidence of my dangerous deterioration. She positioned herself as a concerned daughter-in-law who was reluctantly sharing family tragedy for the greater good of educating the public about elderly mental health. The story aired on a primetime news magazine with the headline, "When Love Becomes Obsession, A Family's Nightmare." I watched from my hospital bed as my own words were used to destroy me on national television. My desperate attempt to share evidence twisted into proof of my supposed descent into paranoid delusion. The narrator described me as a former jewelry professional whose expertise in valuation and documentation had made her delusions particularly convincing and dangerous. They portrayed my recordings as fabricated evidence, my professional analysis as the confused ramblings of someone whose career had given her dangerous knowledge about creating false documentation. Daniel's response was swift and devastating. He appeared on the same program for a follow-up interview, presenting himself as a heartbroken son dealing with his mother's tragic mental breakdown. This video shows exactly why we had to take legal action to protect ourselves and our children. He said, his voice breaking with practiced emotion. My mother is clearly very unwell, and her background in jewelry appraisal has unfortunately given her the skills to create convincing but completely false evidence. We're heartbroken, but we can't allow her delusions to destroy what's left of our family. But the most crushing moment came when he brought Ethan on camera for a brief statement. My 17-year-old grandson looked directly into the lens with the innocent concern of someone who had been carefully coached. I love my grandmother, he said softly, and I hope she gets the help she needs. But we can't let her hurt herself or anyone else with these fantasies about our family. We just want her to be safe and peaceful. Emily also appeared in the same segment, offering subtle nods of agreement and looks of sympathetic concern. She publicly reinforced Daniel's narrative, making it clear she stood with her brother against our mother's delusions. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love lose touch with reality, she said carefully. We're all hoping Mom can find peace, but we have to protect the children from this kind of confusion and instability. The story went viral on social media, shared thousands of times, with comments praising my family's courage in dealing with such a difficult situation. I became a cautionary tale about the dangers of untreated mental illness in elderly people, an example of how professional knowledge could be corrupted by dementia into something harmful and destructive. But not everyone was convinced by their performance. Dr. Harrison Webb, my former colleague who had been quietly investigating my case, watched the program with growing outrage. As a professional gemologist with training in documentation analysis, he immediately recognized signs of manipulation in the video evidence that had been broadcast. Working with Eleanor from the Gemological Institute, Dr. Webb began a detailed analysis of the recordings that had been shown on television. Their examination revealed clear evidence of editing, splicing, and audio manipulation that proved the video had been deliberately altered to distort my statements. More importantly, Dr. Webb had been investigating Tiffany's background and had uncovered evidence of her past involvement in inheritance disputes with other elderly relatives, a pattern of behavior that supported my claims about her character and motivations. This isn't just family dysfunction, Dr. Webb told Eleanor during one of their strategy sessions. This is a sophisticated fraud that uses media manipulation and legal intimidation to silence the victim. Mildred Johnson isn't crazy. She's being systematically destroyed by people who know exactly what they're doing. Eleanor shared his determination to act. She had known me for over 30 years, had worked alongside me on dozens of professional projects, and had never seen any evidence of the mental instability my family was claiming. Together, they reached out to legal advocates who specialized in elder abuse cases, offering their professional expertise and documentation as evidence of the conspiracy against me. They were building a case quietly and methodically that would eventually expose the lies being told about my competence and the fraud being perpetrated against my estate. As I lay in that hospital bed, watching my final attempt at truth being twisted into evidence of my supposed madness, I felt something I had never experienced before, a complete understanding of how victims of sophisticated abuse can be driven to the edge of sanity by people who know exactly which vulnerabilities to exploit. But I also felt something else, something colder and more determined. If they thought they had finally silenced me completely, if they believed their manipulation of the media had destroyed my credibility forever, they had forgotten something crucial about the kind of woman they were dealing with. A true professional never stops collecting evidence, and somewhere in places they didn't know about, the real truth was still waiting to be discovered. The reckoning was coming, and it would be more complete than they could possibly imagine. The federal lawsuit that Dr. Webb and Eleanor filed on my behalf attracted attention far beyond what any of us had anticipated. What had started as a case of inheritance fraud and elder abuse had become a national conversation about family manipulation, financial exploitation, and the sophisticated ways that vulnerable people can be destroyed by those they trust most. The funding for my legal defense came from an unexpected source. Years earlier, I had documented and authenticated a rare pink diamond for a private collector. When that collection was sold at auction following the owner's death, I was entitled to a finder's fee that had been sitting unclaimed in a legal account. Dr. Webb's investigation had uncovered this forgotten asset, providing the resources needed to hire the best legal team available. My lead attorney was Sandra Chen, a veteran prosecutor who specialized in elder abuse cases and had never lost a case involving financial fraud. She was joined by Dr. Marcus Rivera, a renowned forensic document examiner whose testimony had sent dozens of white-collar criminals to prison, and Patricia Goldman, an aggressive real estate attorney who had spent decades fighting inheritance fraud. Together, they filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit alleging criminal fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy charges that carried both civil and criminal penalties. The case drew national media attention because of the sophisticated nature of the fraud and the viral video that had been used to destroy my reputation. The trial was scheduled to be televised, a decision that Sandra felt was necessary to counter the damage done by the manipulated media coverage. Mrs. Johnson's reputation was destroyed in public, she argued. Justice demands that it be restored in public as well. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and advocates who had been following the case. I sat at the plaintiff's table, no longer the broken woman who had been warehoused in assisted living months earlier. The truth was about to be revealed, and I felt a calm determination that surprised me with its strength. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment when Sandra announced that we would be viewing footage from hidden cameras I had installed in my home office years earlier. The courtroom fell silent as the unedited footage began to play on large screens, visible to everyone present. There, in devastating clarity, was Daniel, sitting at my desk, practicing my signature over and over again on blank documents, his tongue protruding slightly with concentration as he perfected the forgery. "Make sure the loops match exactly." Tiffany's voice could be heard coaching him from off camera. "If this doesn't look perfect, the whole plan falls apart." But the most damaging footage was yet to come. The cameras had captured Daniel and Tiffany meeting with Mr. Jenkins, a corrupt notary who had agreed to process fraudulent mortgage applications in exchange for a substantial fee. "The old hag will never see it coming," Daniel said on the recording, his voice filled with cruel satisfaction. "By the time she realizes what we've done, we'll own her house and she'll be powerless to stop us." Tiffany's response was even more chilling. "I can't wait to see her face when she gets the eviction notice." Maybe then she'll finally understand that young people deserve nice things more than selfish old women who hoard valuable property. The footage continued showing them discussing their strategy for coaching Ethan and Chloe to testify against me their plans for dividing the proceeds from my home sale and their cold calculations about how long I was likely to live and what other assets they might be able to claim. But perhaps the most devastating moment was captured during one of their planning sessions when Tiffany made a comment that sent gasps through the courtroom. "Honestly, I wish the old hag would just die already," she said with casual cruelty. "She's outlived her usefulness, and she's standing in the way of everything we deserve. How hard would it be to make it look like an accident?" Daniel's response wasn't horror or refusal. It was laughter. "Patience, baby. The stress of losing everything will probably finish her off soon enough. And if not well, there are other ways to solve stubborn problems." The court watched in stunned silence as my own son discussed my potential death as if it were a minor inconvenience to be managed rather than a devastating loss to mourn. When Mr. Jenkins was called to testify, the corrupt notary who had processed the fraudulent documents was confronted with video evidence of his own complicity. The man who had enabled their fraud broke down completely on the witness stand. "They offered me $50,000 to notarize forged signatures," he sobbed. "I knew it was wrong, but I needed the money. Mrs. Johnson never signed those mortgage papers. I watched Daniel forge her signature myself, and I stamped it anyway because they said she was mentally incompetent and wouldn't remember." His confession sealed Daniel and Tiffany's fate, but the most devastating moment was yet to come. When Daniel was called to testify in his own defense, the confident, manipulative man who had orchestrated my destruction was nowhere to be seen. Confronted with his own recorded words, his own documented lies, his own systematic cruelty toward the woman who had given him life, he simply fell apart. "I never meant," he began, then stopped, his face crumpling as the magnitude of what he had done finally hit him. "Oh God, what have I become? What have I done to her?" His breakdown was complete and public broadcast to millions of viewers who watched a man confront the full horror of his own actions. He wept uncontrollably, his body shaking with sobs as he finally understood the depth of his betrayal. "She sacrificed everything for me," he whispered into the microphone. "She saved me from my gambling debts, protected me from dangerous people, gave me chance after chance. And I tried to destroy her for money. How could I have become this monster? How could I have been so cruel to my own mother?" Tiffany attempted to flee the courtroom when she saw Daniel's confession, but court officers stopped her before she reached the exit. Her own breakdown was different from Daniel's, driven not by remorse, but by fury at being caught. "This is all his fault," she screamed as they restrained her. "He was weak. He was supposed to handle his mother, not fall apart like a child. I did everything for us, everything to build our future, and he's too pathetic to see it through." Her words revealed everything the court needed to know about her character and her role as the architect of our family's destruction. But perhaps the most heartbreaking moment was watching Emily in the gallery throughout the trial. My daughter, who had been too frightened to support me during my ordeal, sat watching the evidence of Daniel's crimes with growing horror and shame. When the most damaging recordings were played, showing Daniel and Tiffany discussing ways to accelerate my death, Emily broke down completely. She sobbed openly in the courtroom, her face buried in her hands, as she finally understood the full scope of what had been done to me and what she had enabled through her silence and inaction. Her eyes met mine across the courtroom, filled with a remorse so profound it was painful to witness. She mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," over and over, but she didn't approach me, perhaps understanding that the chasm between us was too wide to bridge with simple apologies. As I sat in that courtroom watching the truth finally emerge after months of being treated as a delusional old woman, the dominant emotion wasn't anger or satisfaction. It was profound relief mixed with heartbreak. Relief that the nightmare was ending and justice was finally being served. Heartbreak that the son I had loved and protected had become someone capable of such calculated cruelty, and that my family had been so thoroughly destroyed by greed and manipulation. But there was also something else, a sense of vindication that went beyond legal victory. The truth had emerged, and with it the restoration of my dignity and the validation of everything I had endured. The court's verdict was swift and uncompromising. Judge Patricia Morrison delivered the ruling with the kind of moral authority that comes from witnessing profound evil and having the power to address it definitively. The systematic elder abuse and fraud documented in this case, she said, her voice, carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom, represents one of the most calculated and devastating examples of family manipulation I have encountered in my career. The defendants not only stole the plaintiff's home and destroyed her financial security, but they discussed her death as if it were a business solution to their problems. Daniel was sentenced to 7 to 12 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The charges included not just the theft of my home and the destruction of my reputation, but his systematic manipulation of my grandchildren and his recorded discussions about accelerating my death. Tiffany received 5 to 10 years, her sentence somewhat reduced because of Daniel's role as the primary architect of the scheme, though the judge made clear that her participation had been both knowing and enthusiastic. Mr. Jenkins faced immediate professional disbarment and criminal charges for his role in processing fraudulent documents. His 20-year career as a notary was over-destroyed by his greed and willingness to participate in elder abuse. But beyond the criminal penalties, the court ordered massive financial restitution. I was awarded not just the full value of my stolen home, $750,000, but additional damages for the emotional trauma I had endured and the professional reputation that had been systematically destroyed. Most importantly, Judge Morrison issued a formal statement completely vindicating my character and professional competence. Mrs. Mildred Johnson, she said, looking directly at me, has been vindicated, not just legally, but morally. Her lifetime of service as a jeweler and gemologist, her dedication to preserving family legacies, and her unwavering integrity have been maliciously attacked by people who exploited her love for their own gain. This court finds that she represents the highest ideals of professional dedication and family devotion. The judge went on to condemn the exploitation of elderly people by family members, calling it a betrayal that strikes at the heart of everything we value about family bonds and respect for our elders. She ordered that my case be used as precedent for future elder abuse prosecutions, and that my story be included in training materials for legal and financial professionals. Watching Daniel led away in handcuffs was surreal. This man who had controlled every aspect of my destruction for so long was now powerless, facing years of imprisonment for his crimes. As they led him past my table, he stopped and tried to speak to me. "Mom, I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I know I can't undo what I've done. I know I can't give you back the years we lost or take away the pain I caused you. But I want you to know that I finally understand how sick I became, how greed poisoned everything good in me. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who was still my little boy, despite everything. What I felt wasn't anger anymore. It was something closer to grief for the son I had lost to his own destructive choices. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I hope you use your time in prison to find your way back to the person I raised you to be. That person is still in there somewhere, buried under all the lies and cruelty. I pray you can find him again." Tiffany's reaction to her sentencing was very different. She showed no remorse, only fury at being caught and punished. As they led her away, she turned back to shout at me one final time, "This isn't over, Mildred. You think you've won, but you've destroyed your own family? Daniel will never forgive you for this." Her words bounced off me harmlessly. I had learned that Tiffany's opinion of anything, including my family relationships, had no power over me anymore. But it was Emily's approach after the sentencing that truly moved me. My daughter, who had spent months in fearful silence while I was systematically destroyed, came to me with a face full of shame and tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking as she tried to find words for her regret. I was scared and confused, and I let them convince me that staying neutral was the safest choice. I should have listened to you. I should have investigated. I should have protected you instead of abandoning you. Her apology was raw and genuine, filled with the kind of remorse that comes from truly understanding the magnitude of one's failure. She didn't make excuses or try to minimize her role in my suffering. She simply acknowledged her failure and begged for the chance to make amends. "I want to be the daughter you raised me to be," she continued. "I want to help you rebuild what was destroyed. I want to earn back your trust, even if it takes the rest of my life." Looking at Emily, seeing her genuine remorse and understanding of what she had done, I felt my heart beginning to heal from wounds I thought would never close. "Emily," I said, reaching out to take her hands, "we both made mistakes during this nightmare. What matters now is that we acknowledge the truth and work to rebuild what was broken. That's going to take time and effort from both of us." The reunion with my grandchildren was more gradual and carefully managed. Ethan and Chloe, now 18 and 16, were deeply traumatized by their father's exposure and imprisonment. They had spent years being coached to reject me, and now they had to process the reality that everything they had been told was a lie. Their first visit to me was supervised by a family therapist who specialized in helping children recover from parental manipulation. Both of them were nervous, confused, carrying the weight of years of programmed rejection that they were just beginning to understand. "Grandma," Chloe said tearfully, "I don't know how to feel about anything anymore. I used to love you so much, and then Dad and Tiffany made me believe you were dangerous. Now I don't know what's real." "What's real," I told her, "is that I love you and that love never changed even when you couldn't feel it. We're going to take this slowly, and we're going to help you remember who you really are, not who you were told to be." The process of rebuilding these relationships was slow and sometimes painful. The children had to confront the reality that their father had manipulated them, used them as weapons against someone who loved them. But children are remarkably resilient, and with good therapy and patient love, they began to rediscover their authentic feelings and memories. Daniel's letters from prison became a regular part of my life, though I read them with mixed emotions. His remorse seemed genuine, his understanding of what he had done growing deeper with each letter. He was receiving therapy and working toward a degree in social work, hoping to dedicate his life to helping other families avoid the destructive patterns he had created in his own. "I'll never be able to undo what I did to you," he wrote in one letter, "but I want to spend whatever time I have left making sure other elderly people don't suffer the way I made you suffer. Maybe that's how I can honor the mother who loved me, even when I didn't deserve it. The letters were both heartbreaking and hopeful. Heartbreaking because they reminded me of the son I had lost to greed and manipulation. Hopeful because they suggested that person might still be redeemable, even after everything he had done. Tiffany remained in prison unrepentant and bitter, blaming everyone except herself for the consequences of her choices. Her isolation was complete and self-imposed, the natural result of a life built on manipulation and exploitation. The victory was complete, but it was also bittersweet. I had reclaimed my home, my reputation, and my family relationships, but the cost had been enormous. Years of my life had been stolen. My trust in my own children had been shattered, and the family unit that Arthur and I had worked so hard to build had been irrevocably changed. But as I sat in that courtroom after the sentencing, surrounded by Emily and the grandchildren who were slowly remembering how to love me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, hope for the future. The truth had emerged, justice had been served, and healing, though it would take time, was finally possible. 3 years have passed since the trial that vindicated my choices and restored my dignity, and my life has become something I could never have imagined during those dark months of manipulation and abuse. I am not just surviving the aftermath of betrayal. I am thriving in ways that surprise me every day. My beloved home has been restored to its former glory and beyond. The house where Arthur and I built our life together, where I had planned to spend my final years surrounded by family memories, has been lovingly renovated to incorporate modern comforts while preserving every historical detail that tells the story of our shared life. The garden that Tiffany had planned to destroy has been expanded and redesigned as a memorial to family legacy and enduring love. The old jewelry workshop in the basement where I used to practice my craft has been transformed into a small teaching studio where I offer workshops on jewelry appraisal and the historical significance of family heirlooms. My days are filled with meaningful work and authentic relationships. I've become a respected advocate for elder rights and inheritance protection, speaking at conferences across the country about the sophisticated methods that financial predators use to exploit vulnerable seniors. My memoir, The Ring They Couldn't Steal, has become a bestseller and has helped countless families recognize and address similar patterns of manipulation. The local historical society has established a program on my property where I work with young people interested in gemology and family history, teaching them the importance of preserving authentic family narratives and protecting valuable heirlooms from those who would exploit them for profit. But the greatest transformation has been in my family relationships. Emily and I have developed a bond that is deeper and more authentic than anything we had before the crisis. She moved back to town to be closer to me, and we spend hours together working in the garden, organizing family documents, and simply enjoying each other's company. Mom, she told me recently as we sorted through old photographs, I know it sounds strange, but I think we're closer now than we ever were before. Going through this nightmare together, seeing how strong you are, learning to fight for what's right, instead of just avoiding conflict, it's changed me in ways I'm still discovering. Emily has become not just my daughter, but my closest friend and strongest advocate. She accompanies me to speaking engagements, helps manage the correspondence from other families seeking advice, and has taken on the role of protecting me from those who might try to exploit my renewed visibility. The relationship with my grandchildren has blossomed beyond my wildest hopes. Ethan, now 21, has developed a passion for historical preservation and is considering a career in family archival work. He spends his summers working with me on various projects, cataloging documents, and learning the techniques I've perfected over decades. "Grandma," he said to me last month as we worked together in my studio, "I want to make sure our family's real story is preserved forever. Not the lies Dad and Tiffany tried to create, but the truth about all of us, including our mistakes and how we learned from them." Chloe, now 19, has inherited my appreciation for craftsmanship and beauty. She's studying art history in college and has written several papers about the cultural significance of family jewelry and heirlooms. Her work is helping other young people understand why these objects matter beyond their monetary value. "You taught me that beautiful things have stories," she told me during one of our long conversations. "That lesson is going to guide everything I do with my life. Even my relationship with Daniel has evolved into something I never expected. His letters from prison showed genuine growth and understanding of what he did. He's working with other inmates on family reconciliation programs and has become an advocate for elder abuse prevention within the prison system. I know I may never earn your full forgiveness," he wrote in his most recent letter, "but I want you to know that every day I work to become the son you raised me to be. Your strength and grace in forgiving me has given me hope that redemption is possible even for someone who fell as far as I did. I do forgive him, though our relationship will never be what it once was. He's still my son, still the little boy I raised and loved, but he's also someone who hurt me in ways that changed us both forever. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending that serious harm wasn't done." Tiffany's fate has been very different. She remains in prison, unrepentant and bitter, blaming everyone except herself for the consequences of her choices. She has written to me several times, demanding money and threatening new legal action letters that I simply forward to my attorney without response. My work as an advocate has given me a sense of purpose that extends far beyond my personal recovery. I testify regularly before legislative committees about the need for stronger elder protection laws. I work with law enforcement agencies to train officers in recognizing sophisticated financial abuse. Most importantly, I mentor other seniors who are fighting similar battles, helping them understand that they have rights and resources even when their own families turn against them. Mrs. Johnson, a woman told me recently at one of my speaking engagements, "Your story gave me the courage to fight for my own inheritance when my stepchildren tried to manipulate my late husband's will. I kept thinking about how you never gave up, and it helped me find the strength to demand the truth." That connection, that ability to transform my own suffering into help for others, has given meaning to everything I endured. The pain wasn't pointless if it can prevent other families from experiencing similar destruction. My health has improved dramatically since the stress of the legal battle ended and my home was restored. I wake up each morning feeling energetic and purposeful, surrounded by beauty and authentic relationships. The fear and anxiety that dominated my life during those dark months have been replaced by confidence and peace. But perhaps the most profound change is in my understanding of what family really means. It's not about blood relationships or legal obligations. It's about truth, respect, support, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Some of my closest family members now are people who aren't related to me by birth, but who stood by me when I needed them most. Dr. Webb and Eleanor have become like siblings to me, part of a chosen family built on shared values and mutual respect. The young people who participate in my workshops feel like grandchildren eager to learn and carrying forward the values I hold dear. As I sit in my restored garden this evening, watching the sunset over the home that I nearly lost to greed and manipulation, I feel a peace that I never thought possible during those dark months of systematic abuse. The journey was painful beyond anything I could have imagined, but it led me to this moment of profound contentment and purpose. I am surrounded by authentic love, meaningful work, and the knowledge that truth ultimately prevails even when the battle seems hopeless. Arthur's ring rests safely in my jewelry box, no longer a symbol of what I might lose, but a reminder of what cannot be taken from those who refuse to surrender their dignity. The replica that Daniel and Tiffany had coveted now sits in a museum display about elder abuse, a testament to the importance of protecting family treasures from those who see only monetary value. Today, as I sit in the workshop where I once crafted beautiful pieces for clients who trusted me with their precious memories, I am surrounded by evidence of a life rebuilt on truth and authentic relationships. The tools of my trade, once dismissed as outdated relics by those who sought to diminish my worth, now serve a new purpose as instruments of education and empowerment for others who face similar battles. My home has become exactly what Arthur and I always dreamed it would be, a sanctuary where family gathers not out of obligation, but out of genuine love and respect. Emily brings her children here every weekend, and they learn the same lessons about craftsmanship, beauty, and integrity that I once tried to teach their father. The continuity of values, nearly broken by greed and manipulation, has been restored through courage and truth. The work I do now as an advocate for elder rights gives profound meaning to every day. Last month, I testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections against inheritance fraud, sharing my story with lawmakers who have the power to prevent others from enduring what I experienced. The foundation I established has already helped hundreds of families navigate similar crises, providing them with the legal and emotional support I was fortunate enough to eventually receive. Through all of this, I have learned that my greatest strength was never my professional expertise or my financial resources or even my capacity for love. My greatest strength was my refusal to accept lies as truth. My determination to fight for authentic relationships, even when doing so seemed impossible, and my faith that justice, though delayed, would ultimately prevail. The lesson I carry forward, and the one I hope others will learn from my story, is that family bonds built on truth and mutual respect are worth fighting for, but they cannot be forced or maintained through fear, guilt, or manipulation. Real love seeks the other person's genuine well-being and growth, not compliance or submission to exploitation. Most importantly, I have learned that dignity and self-worth are not gifts that others can give or take away. They are inherent qualities that can be obscured by abuse, but never truly destroyed. No matter how completely others may try to erase you, your essence remains. Your truth remains. Your capacity for healing and renewal remains. This story stands as my testament to the insidious nature of familial financial exploitation and the profound courage it takes for a survivor to fight for their fundamental rights and dignity. But it is also proof that truth will ultimately prevail, that stolen legacies can be reclaimed even after profound betrayal, and that a life of purpose and authentic connection is always possible for those who have the courage to demand it. I am Mildred, and I am 72 years old. I am a mother-grandmother, retired gemologist survivor of systematic abuse, an advocate for others who face similar struggles. I am living proof that integrity and resilience can triumph over even the most ruthless greed, and that authentic happiness can emerge from even the deepest pain. My legacy is no longer one of professional achievements or preserved heirlooms, but of courage, truth, and the transformative power of refusing to let others define your worth. This is my story, and it ends not with bitterness or regret, but with profound gratitude for a life reclaimed and relationships restored. It ends with hope for others who may be fighting similar battles, and with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that love, real love, is always stronger than lies.